Welcome to Section 420, Talkin Yankees. In this episode, we speak with author Ruth Hanford Morhard. Her book, entitled Miss Morehard and the Boys, tells the amazing true story of the first boys baseball league back in 1937. And she joins us now to talk about it. Hi, Ruth. Thanks for coming on.
I'm delighted to be here.
Now, we're going to discuss your book, which is a fantastic true story, Mrs. Morehard and the Boys. But just first, I want to get into yourself. People can follow you. You have your website, ruthhanfordmorhard.com. Lots of great material, pictures of all the stuff that we're going to discuss, as well as follow you on Twitter. Yourself, you were actually a young baseball fan growing up in Connecticut. So tell us about that.
Yes, well, I had an older cousin and who lived very close to me, and I think our favorite thing in the whole world was following, and I hate to say it, the Boston Red Sox. In Connecticut, where we lived, half the population were Yankee fans and half were Red Sox fans. Well, of course, you had the National League teams, but we never paid attention to them. But somehow we ended up in the Red Sox group. And I mean, I just absolutely love baseball. Other girls were playing with dolls, and I was reading baseball books and following every team. And I knew all of the major league batting averages and all of the earned run averages. And I mean, I was just a crazy baseball fan.
Is there any particular reason for that? Was it just because, because I know a lot of people used to say, but they just like to look at the box scores, and just through the box scores themselves, they fell in love with the game more than actually watching the game. They just love the stats and just reading about the players and how many hits they got in the game.
Well, we didn't have a major league team in Connecticut. You'd have to go to Boston or you'd have to go to New York. So, we listened to it on the radio, we listened to the games on the radio, and I think I just got so interested that I followed all the statistics. I wanted to know all about all the players, and not just the Red Sox players, but the players in all the leagues. I was just absolutely fascinated with baseball. And I guess it's only right that, eventually I would write a book that had something to do with baseball. And I'm still a baseball fan. I live in the Cleveland area now, and I decided I had to follow the Cleveland Indians if I was going to live here. But I still follow the Red Sox and the Yankees and love those teams as well, although I didn't love the Yankees at the time.
No, I understand the rivalry. Did you get a chance to go to Fenway a few times and get to see some Yankee Red Sox games at Fenway?
No, I never got a chance to go to Fenway until many, many years later. And I just wanted to. I didn't really see a professional baseball game until I moved to Cleveland.
So what did you actually study, and what type of career path did you take, before becoming a published author?
Well, I had a kind of a very checkered career. I married young. I had 4 children in 5 years, and I did a lot of musical theater at one time, and I did a lot of promotion work for musical theater. I eventually got into doing PR for nonprofit organizations, and I was recruited to Cleveland to be the marketing director for United Way in Cleveland. And from then on, I kind of went into my own business. With 4 kids to support, I didn't get around to doing any writing, although that was another love of mine. As time went on, I found that I really liked writing more than anything else I was doing. So I did some corporate histories for corporations. I was always writing for someone else, and when I discovered Mrs. Morehard's story, I decided maybe it was time to do something on my own.
But you had a book before that in 2013, Wired to Move, about the early stages of child development. Can you just give us that little brief overview of that, of that book?
Yeah, one of my clients was an organization called Starting Point, which really looks into the quality and quantity of childcare, tries to improve the quality, and tries to make childcare more available and accessible to people. Well, they discovered in doing some of their research that boys were getting expelled from preschools at a very, alarming rate. So they looked into it, and they decided that they needed to put together a program for boys. One of the things that they discovered was, years ago, boys were out playing. They were out in the yard, they were running around, they were doing, all the things that boys usually do. Well, today, with so many people working, many boys are in daycare. The teachers are largely women, and the women expect the boys to sit quietly and learn like the little girls do, and they can't do that. They're not wired that way. So basically what we decided to do was to come up with a program where for teachers, to teach them to deal with boys a little differently, to make sure that they had plenty of time for movement. You don't just sit them down in a circle and expect them to sit quietly, because they're going to be nudging each other, or they're going to be wriggling around. That's the way they're made.
Yeah, and I thought that was actually a perfect transition, a little bit getting into now the book we'll discuss, Mrs. Morhard and the Boys, because it does center around Junior, who is Al, and we will get into that. A troubled young kid getting in trouble, but through baseball and forming a boys league, able to, kind of put his energy towards something. Maybe talk about maybe how you met Al, who I guess becomes, Junior in this book, and and how that you kind of fell into this whole story.
Well, as I mentioned, I was recruited to Cleveland for a job, and I had 4 kids to support, and no time for for socializing. But I just by chance met Al Morhard, and he was raising 3 children of his own, and so we became friends, and then it went on from there. I met his mother just a few months before she passed away. After she passed away, we were cleaning out her house, and I discovered a big can of film, 16 millimeter film, and it said "Bring Up Baseball" on the side. Well, I asked Al what that was all about, and he said, "Oh, that's about my mother. She started the Little League. The Cleveland Indians made that film about her." And, not knowing him that well, and, not knowing anything about his mother, I was pretty skeptical. And in my own mind, I said, sure, she did. But I was curious. So we rented a 16 millimeter projector. We looked at the film, and I was absolutely astounded. There she was, in her house with the boys in the backyard. And then she was on the field that she created, blowing her whistle as the boys were playing baseball, and the parents were in the stands, the women wearing hats and dresses, and the men in sport coats or suits, which you never see today. So I just got very curious, and I started researching it. And the more I researched, the more I found that her life was absolutely as compelling as her achievement in starting the first boys baseball leagues. She was one of 17 children. She left home at age 12, and you can only imagine the hardships and the struggles and the obstacles that she faced. But she got through it all. She unfortunately married 2 men who were not the best choices, probably out of desperation, because they were very successful, at least on the surface. And but underneath it all, they were alcoholics, and they abused her. So she ended up divorcing both of them, and she had 2 children to raise, which was not an easy task. I mean, we're talking the Depression. Most women stayed home with their children at the time. There were no support services available. She had to work. She had to support these children and herself. And she felt she was neglecting her son, and her son was beginning to act out. I mean, he had seen his father chase his mother around the dining room table with a butcher knife and things like that. And, he was absolutely traumatized. And he was showing it in ways that weren't wonderful. At one point, he he took a BB gun and he was shooting the windows of their beautiful leaded glass windows of a neighbor's house out of his bedroom window. And at that point, she said, "I've got to do something. I just don't know what." And then one day she's looking out the front window and she sees him. He's in the street with a baseball bat and not a baseball bat, just a stick of wood and a tennis ball. And he's got a Cleveland Indians hat on his head. And he's batting it around, and it's kind of like the light went off. And she said, "Well, maybe baseball's the answer." So she tried to find a baseball team in the area, and she couldn't find anything close by. So she decided to go up to the mayor's office. The mayor didn't know of any teams either, but he said they could play in the field right in back of town hall. So this is 1937, and they started playing there. Well, unfortunately, there was no room for a ball field or an outfield, and the balls were the ground was not level, and the balls were rolling into the street. So she decided to look for another place. So she and Junior were out. We're going to this place called Lenny's Chicken in the Basket to get something to eat, and she noticed a field right there, and so she decided to see who owned it and see if the boys could use it. Well, she found the owner of the field was a developer who was building a small shopping center there. And I guess she charmed him because he said she could use the field unless he needed it. So she got the boys together and they tried to clean up the field, but it was much too much for them. There was trash all around and stones, and the grass was like knee high. So she went back to the mayor and told the mayor that it would be a good idea for the town and for the boys if they had if they would help them build a field there. And the mayor did. So they built a beautiful field. She raised money for a backstop and for stands. She held ox roasts on the front lawn of the town hall. And so they had a beautiful field. And she found a couple of teams that they could play. There was a Catholic youth organization team, and then there was another team, and the kids were wearing shorts and shirts. And the next thing she decided was that the boys should have uniforms, and the boys all wanted, they all idolized the Cleveland Indians. So she went to the sporting goods store nearby. She met a man named Laddie Plasek, who was a rep for Wilson Sporting Goods, but he was also the head scout for the Cleveland Indians. And he was absolutely charmed with the idea. And he got her uniforms for the boys at cost. And he also got very involved with her teams, and kind of was the pro that was kind of helping her with the management and a lot of the other aspects of the game. Well, all the other boys on the other teams, her team was called the Little Indians. The uniforms were exact replicas of Cleveland Indians uniforms, except for one thing. The Indians uniforms had the Indian on the sleeve, but the boys' arms were too small, so they had to put the Indian on the back. The other boys on the other teams, they're still wearing their shorts and shirts, and they want uniforms, nice uniforms like that. So she got them uniforms. They became the little White Sox or the little Yankees or whatever teams. And gradually more and more boys wanted to play. They saw these kids in replicas of major league uniforms. And pretty soon she had a league. And all of the teams had major league names, major league uniforms.
And people can go to your website really quick just to see the footage of this. It's on YouTube, but it's also on your website, Ruth Hanford Morhard. You can actually see the black and white footage of these kids and of the uniform and the actual field and Josephine Morhard.
Yeah, and I mean it's an amazing film. It's very much it was made in 1941. It's very much a 1940s film with Pinky Hunter, who was one of the Indians broadcasters at the time. But it's really an amazing film, and that was made after she had started the Little National League with National League teams again, and she had two diamonds. And they were in University Heights, Ohio. But kids came from all over the area. I mean, way on the west side, if you know Cleveland, it sprawls all along Lake Erie and down almost to Akron. And kids were coming from all over the area. Kids were coming from orphanages and just about everywhere. So, of course, the next thing, if she had a little American League and a little National League, she decided to have a little World Series. What I should also say was that the Cleveland Indians got very involved. Players like Bob Feller and Jeff Heath, who was a wonderful player but kind of had an attitude issue, and Roy Weatherly, Mel Harder, who was a wonderful pitcher and also the pitching coach when the Indians won the 1948 World Series. He'd often invite the boys over to his home, and he'd give them soda and popcorn and regale them with stories of the Indians. And there was one thing he always used to tell them, and that was to play to win, but enjoy the game and always be good sports. So they taught a lot of the Indians, and including Laddie Plasek, who was a scout, and some of the other scouts, they taught the boys how to play, how to field, how to catch, how to pitch, and how to hit, which was absolutely amazing. And if you've seen the film, these kids were playing at a very, very high level. And a lot of people who came in to see the Cleveland Indians heard about these teams and came to watch them, and they couldn't believe how well these boys were playing.
In addition, they also had real umpires, real official umpires doing this, taking their time out to umpire these games. So again, like you said, the uniforms were great. You got big name, real, the Cleveland Indians got behind it. You got real umpires umpiring the game. Again, teaching these boys and, teaching them play the game the right way and umpiring it the right way. Yes,
and one of the umpires was a man named Hal Leibowitz, who was a longtime sports editor of the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and also had a column in the Sporting News, and has been elected to the writers' wing of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And he was, he had been a high school coach, and he just loved the boys. And yes, he was an umpire, but after the games, he'd pull the boys aside, and he'd ask them. He said, "What do you think you could have done better?" And they'd tell him, and he said they were usually right. But he also liked to coach the boys after the games. But he was fair as an umpire as well. The next thing she decided to do, as I mentioned, was to have a little World Series. And Josephine Morhard was not one to do things in a small way. So she went to the Cleveland Indians owner, Alva Bradley, and asked if they could have it in the League Park, which then was the weekday home of the Cleveland Indians. It was also the place for Yankee fans where Joe DiMaggio hit safely for the 56th time. And Babe Ruth hit his 500th home run. But the Indians at the time played their weekday games at League Park and on weekends at the much bigger Cleveland Stadium. At any rate, the Little Indians played the Little Cardinals in the World Series game. And at this point in time, the war was heating up in Europe, and Britain was pretty much standing alone. So she decided that all proceeds from the Little World Series game would go to British relief efforts, especially the efforts helping young boys. Many of the kids, British kids, were being sent to the United States and other countries that hadn't been dominated by Germany, in fear that Germany would soon occupy Britain, which luckily it never did. And one of Junior Morhard's friends had one of these boys living with him, who had just been uprooted from his home and sent to live with a family in University Heights. Little World Series game was on September 28th, 1941, which incidentally, for my Red Sox fan friends, is the same day that Ted Williams hit his last at bat for the 406 average that still has not been equal. But anyway, 2 months later, what happened? Pearl Harbor. So everything in the country changed to the war. and the war effort. The money was going to the war effort. She was having a harder time raising money. A lot of men were being drafted, so women were going to work. Gas was rationed. It was very hard to get the boys to the games, and the whole tenor of the country had changed. She kept it going as long as she could. She had another little World Series in 1942. Actually, 1942 was her best year. She added more teams, and they were going great, but time took its toll, and in 1944 she had to disband the leagues, much to her chagrin. And by that time she was pretty much funding the leagues with her own money from the meat market that she was running. And she just could not continue to do that. So she unfortunately had to disband the leagues at that time. Now, the Little League that we know today was started in Williamsport in 1939, 2 years later. They had a different model in that businesses supported each team. So that was probably a better model for making it through the war. They made it through, but they struggled too, and they really started growing after the war was over. And they had their first Little World Series in 1946, which was 5 years after hers.
Yeah, actually, you must have read my mind, because I remember I was reading that up, that she started her league 2 years before what we know as the Little League, Baseball Associated in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, but she was a couple of years ahead of that. And overall, you're talking about this one of the unsung pioneers of baseball history. As again, during that era, tough era for a woman, kind of way ahead of her time, just being tough and getting this all done. Now you got to meet her towards the end of her life, but did you see that in her? Was that the toughness there, or like how can you describe her? Seeing, knowing her in person.
When I met her, she was in her late 80s, and she was just this little woman. She wasn't even 5 feet tall, but she hadn't lost anything. But she didn't talk about herself. She was interested in other people. She was, she loved to talk about her grandkids. You would never have known that she had done this. And what's interesting too is that 30 years after the first Little American League was formed, the boys held a reunion for her. They never forgot her. And they asked her, they said, "We'd like to get you some recognition." And she said, "Oh, that's not important." She said, "I did what I wanted to do. I wanted you boys to grow up right, and you have." And that was her objective. She wasn't looking for fame. But when I met her in her late 80s, I mean, her mind was as sharp as it could be, and you could see some of that feistiness. But as I said, she was very very humble.
So, other than your book, is there anyone else who really knows of the story, other than the boys that were involved in the league?
You mean before I wrote the book?
Yeah.
Well, it's mainly at the time, newspapers all across the country wrote about it because it was so unique. I mean, I've got clippings from papers in Washington, D.C. and New Mexico and Florida and Maine. I mean, all over the country. The Associated Press wrote stories about her and had pictures. So at the time, a lot of people knew about it, but then time went on and the Little League became the story. Even here in Cleveland, very few people remembered it, but we'd go to like Al's high school reunions, or we'd go to just walk down the street, and people would come up to him and tell him how much the leagues and his mother meant to them. It just amazed me. She was a wonderful person. I mean, she used to inspire them. I mean, she had a whistle, she insisted that there were rules and they had to obey the rules, because kids were doing, they were doing somersaults in the outfield and, yelling at the umpires when they first started. Well, she wasn't going to have any of that. So she had a whistle, and she didn't force her rules with a whistle, and she insisted that the boys do a good deed before they ever went on the field. And she enforced that too. But on the other hand, she encouraged them and she inspired them, and she'd say, look what I've been through in my life. If I can do it, you can do it.
And when you first saw that footage of her, was it a combination of that you yourself loved the game, and you kind of maybe you saw any parallel or similarities between yourself and her? What was that spark that just said, like, I got to tell the story?
Well, it was an untold story, and that fascinated me. But I was also, I was also a single mother trying to raise kids. Sure, there were definite similarities in our lives that made me want to go into her life story. Initially I was just going to write about the leagues, but the more I found out about her and her amazing life and all the obstacles she overcame, it was inspiring to me too.
So it's Mrs. Morehard and the Boys. The book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles online. Also, people should check out your website, Ruth Hanford Morhard. You get to see all the great footage of this stuff. So yeah, we're talking about it, you can actually see the black and white footage. So the book was published last year. It's a great story. At first I wasn't sure if it was real or not, because this was, could this actually happen? But it did. It's a true story. So in terms of this, the feedback you've gotten, people complimenting you on the book, or anyone has anything surprised you just in terms of the feedback from the book?
Well, I've gotten some wonderful feedback, and some wonderful comments from people. People, it's hard to get the attention of people sometimes with a book, especially in this particular time when the bookstores are closed. But the people who read it, they just send the most wonderful comments, and they seem to love her story and be inspired by it.
Well, I want to thank you for telling the story. Again, it's one of the great, really unknown baseball stories in history. And I'm going to let it slide that you rooted for both the Red Sox and now the Indians. We'll let it slide just for this episode.
Yes, well, we love the Yankees too.
There you go. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.